fans, welcome back to Room 237, and I'm back with another review of a film that was released recently. This came out last year in 2021, and I think this was one of the first films to be released in theaters amidst or after the whole COVID, which actually this was kind of released as a pandemic film, which it does take place during a pandemic. It doesn't come out and say Corona or COVID, but a lot of the things we see throughout the film are treated like COVID. It just never really says what it is. But it's very different. I mean, the pandemic actually kind of takes a back seat to it. It is very different than what the trailer makes it out to be, and probably what a lot of people thought it was going to be. But it's a film by Ben Wheatley, who I've heard his name. I know the other films that he's directed. I just haven't seen them. Kill List, High Rise, Rebecca, amongst many other ones. And I know he has a very distinct style. Like, he's one of those directors where you can watch it, you can tell it's a film of his. But this was his 2021 pandemic film, In the Earth. Now, I'd heard of this film, I'd seen it come up, and it got quite a bit of praise. I know just on some of the posters, like the first great horror film of 2021, extremely stunning, extraordinary descent into madness. I think one said, like, a return of epic horror, which I'll get into that. It has a 79 on Rotten Tomatoes, so it was received fairly well. As best horror of... because I don't remember the order of what horror movies came out when in 2021. I would say I enjoyed Censor more. I would say that was probably my favorite horror film of 2021. I did like Last Night in Soho more. Even though they're very, very different films... I would say this one was probably better made than a Malignant. I liked it more consistently all the way through than I did Malignant. The only one I could kind of say is similar to would be Feast, or The Feast, which you can find on Hulu, which is where I watched this. Because that's a very slower paced, art housey, symbolic kind of film. I'd probably say that I like The Feast more as well. So it was written and directed by Ben Wheatley and stars Joel Fry, Reese Shearsmith, Haley Squires, and Elora Torchia. I believe those are our 4 main characters. Yeah. Which I think Ella Torchia was in... or at least one of them was. Yeah, I think she was in Midsummer, which I've reviewed on that and got eaten alive for my opinion on that film. Haley Squires was in a movie called In Fabric that I bought 2 copies, 2 made-on-demand Blu-rays, and they will not play. So I still haven't seen In Fabric, which is unfortunate because I really want to. Also, there's appearances by Mark Monero and John Hollingworth. But really, Fry, Shearsmith, Squires, and Torchia, those are really our main players throughout the whole film. Cinematography by Nick Gillespie. It was edited by Ben Wheatley. And music by Clint Mansell, which I've seen his name a bunch. I know he's composed a lot of films, such as A Requiem for a Dream, one of my favorite scores. Let's see. I'm just going over the ones that I've seen. The Wrestler, Black Swan. So he's done a few with Ben Wheatley, like he also did High Rise, but I never saw that. So yeah, I guess Requiem for a Dream is the one that always comes to mind. The score is probably the best part of this movie, next to the cinematography, just how it's filmed. The score is this very in it's used very well. Most of this movie is very, very quiet because it all takes place out in the woods, which really helps the atmosphere. The story is basically Joe Fry plays this guy named Martin, who's a scientist that works within crop efficiency. I think it opens up with him smashing some rock and putting it in the earth, and I think that comes into play later. But a colleague of his, who is also an ex girlfriend of his, Dr. Wendell, has gone missing, or whatever station has not heard from her. And it's been months because of this pandemic. So now he's had his physical, he's clear, it's good enough to go outside. He's going to go out in the woods to find her. He's going to go out to where she's stationed herself. And he's teamed up with this park ranger named Alma, played by Torchia. And they're basically trying to find Dr. Wendell. And it's the things that happen on this trek that's kind of most of the film. At first, it kind of goes into like 28 Days Later territory as far as getting help, but then that person's not very kind. I will be getting into spoilers because this just came out last year, and if you are into slower paced, more artsy horror films, then I do recommend it. I did enjoy this film quite a bit. But where the entirety of this film is pretty much outside in the woods, the lack of music really helps. I mean, you get the snapping of twigs, you get the sound of wind through the leaves, you get birds chirping. At night you get the crickets. Very good sound design, and it really creates this atmosphere of both isolation and dread. But the score, which is very low, but it's very, I don't really know how to describe it. The pieces of music is used sparingly up until we get to the station of Dr. Wendell, because her whole thing is light and sound. And the score is basically, from what I remember, the music that she makes, which is this very... A lot of the score kind of reminded me of like a theremin, but I don't think that's what it was. It sounds like this very low, distorted, like horror movie music, but like this droned out kind of sound, which I thought was very effective. Now, this also has a disclaimer at the very beginning of the film. I don't think it was put out by the distributors or anything. Like, it looks like it's part of the movie, saying if you have epilepsy or are, flashing light sensitive, you may have a reaction. And that's because the whole third act of this film is constant strobing. Even a lot of it does have a lot of, I think they're called hip-hop cuts or hip-hop edits throughout the film, like really just fast kind of cuts. But I'm still not entirely sure what the main meaning of the film was. I think there is a lot of sort of superstition and stuff like that versus textbook science. Because these two other scientists they run into, or this other scientist than Dr. Wendell, one believes that you can communicate with... I should back up. Before Martin and Alma embark on their journey, at the Rangers office or whatever, there's this picture, this old drawing of a cloaked figure with some sort of head and branches for hair. Sort of a horror movie, folk horror type monster, which it does have a good blend of folk horror as well. And the spirit is called Parnag Feg, which we come to find out sort of what that means later on. It starts off kind of like this urban legend, this spirit of the woods, or this some entity of the woods. But then we come to find out that this other scientist named Zach and Dr. Wendell have both kind of found a way to not only prove its existence, but also a way to communicate with it. And Zach believes it's more through art and creative ways, but also things like superstition and sacrifice. Whereas Dr. Wendell wants to communicate with it more through science experiments, more logistically. And she finds out that you can get some response or have some success with the way to communicate with it is, through light and sound. So there's speakers all in the woods, and she's able to conduct this light and sound show, essentially. Also, a lot of the covers features, like, I think the DVD has Alma's face with these white eyes. That kind of comes into play. There's also posters with the other characters with white eyes, but I think the original poster was just this clearing in the woods with this stone with like a hole through the top of it. That stone does come into play. Like, I'm pretty sure that was the stone or something to do with the stone with how Martin cut his foot. But I guess I can explain a little bit. The first night, they're on their trek. They camp out. They're assaulted in the middle of the night. We don't see who or why. It's actually kind of hard to see. It's all from inside of the tent, which I thought was a nice detail. They wake up in the morning. All their shit's gone, including their shoes. So they're walking. Martin cuts his foot. And just with the way Parnag Feg is explained later on, which I'll save for spoilers, maybe the stone that he was breaking up was able to put itself there and cut his foot. But then they run into this guy named Zach. Again, the guy that wants to communicate with nature or the woods through art and creativity and sacrifice. And that's the 28 days later part, because first he treats them with hospitality. He helps Martin's foot, he gives him food, he gives him shoes, but then he drugs him and he, puts them in this white ceremony stuff, takes pictures, puts white papers over their eyes. He's trying to, do his experiments. But then they get away, then they meet up with Dr. Wendell, and then they do her experiments. That's all I'll say before spoilers. Again, still not quite sure what the greater meaning of this film is, other than maybe science versus a superstition. That was the most that I took away from it. But again, if you're going to go into it thinking it's a pandemic movie, like, say, Host, or what was the other one? Safer at Home. Aside from being like Skype footage, like those films, but like an actual movie, it more so just takes place during the pandemic. I mean, other than seeing Martin go through his physical, and then later on we do see him with a nasal swab. But and they do kind of talk about the devastation, but they don't come out and say COVID. It's just more so little things that happen are very relatable to the things about COVID. This was a movie kind of like Parasite I went into. By that, I mean, went into it not knowing a thing. That there's these people in the woods, it gets kind of trippy. The trailer and the poster, the poster shows like vines going in her mouth and coming. I thought it was going to be like nature attacking, which to an extent it kind of does. Uh, I will say that the editing is pretty nice. I mean, it can be overwhelming or distracting. And not just the quick cuts, but like towards the trippier parts, there's a lot of like DMT design stuff and kaleidoscope shit. Or like weird kind of like fishbowl warping, and it does get trippy and weird, but never so much that it takes you out of it. Like it seems to fit within the confines of tone wise, like this sophisticated artsy tone. And I think I get what like the last line of the film, the last shot means. I'm not quite sure. I'll guess when I get to spoilers, but so that's all I have before spoilers. Again, I do recommend this, especially if you liked, just to keep it like 2021. If you liked The Feast, that kind of artsy, slower paced horror film, then definitely check it out. If you like Ben Wheatley, even though I don't really know, I haven't seen his films, I just know what he's directed. Uh, this would be a good movie to just go in as blind as possible. That's what I did. But the score and the cinematography and the performances, I thought everyone did, a really good job. Especially, even the two main characters, Martin and Alma, are kind of like Zach and Dr. Wendell. They're kind of contrasting. Alma is very, you know, she, from what I got, she kind of thinks with her head more like, okay, this is a bunch of red flags. We should get out of here. Martin is kind of more of the, well, our options are limited. Let's just see what can happen. But yeah, all four performances were very well done. And I can't praise the score enough. I mean, it doesn't sound like Requiem for a Dream, but it does fit the tone of the film and is very effective. So with that, I'm going to get into spoilers. So apparently, well, they are able to escape Zach, because Zach keeps drugging them and doing his like ceremonious photo shoots. But Alma is able to strike him in the head with something, splits his head, it bleeds. He goes outside and he's shooting at him with a crossbow, which the sound design and how those scenes are shot were very well done. I mean, you can like see the arrow coming right by the camera, right into a tree by the character. The whoosh sounds are very well done. And then there's a small detail that you don't often see, so I'm glad they put it in this. Zach's head is bleeding, and he yells Martin. He yells Martin's name, and it's like this long, like, Martin. And as he does, like, you can just see his heart pumping more blood. I thought that was a great detail. And poor Martin just keeps one thing after another. First, he cuts his foot. Then he has very poor stitches put in. But then his foot gets infected, and Zach says they have to amputate 2 toes, but they're too far away from a hospital, and it will spread. So he sloppily amputates 2 toes with a hatchet or an axe. Then they get to Dr. Wendell's, and she has to cauterize it. And then, also Zach has, like, carved some symbols into his arm. One of which he put, like, a little, looked like a wing, like a sterling silver wing on, like, an earring inside that they have to take out. So it's like one thing after another, pain-wise for Martin. Dr. Wendell has this book. Oh, and then they keep trying to tell her about Zach, but she's just like, oh, that's my ex-husband. Oh, no, don't worry about him. Oh, he wouldn't kill you. He's just very into his research. Just full of red flags that only Alma seems to be picking up on. And yeah, she believes that what did this say? Um, well, first Zach explains that Parnag Feg, or the stone that stands nearby. Oh no, he asks Zach what the symbols were, and he says, "Oh, it links him to the stone somehow." But Dr. Wendell explains that because she has this book, like this 1630s sort of believed at the time to be a witchcraft book that talked about Parnag Feg, which she says was this ancient sorcerer that put his soul or his energy into the stone, and now she tries to communicate to it with light and sound. So then, but at one point, Alma wants to leave, but Dr. Wendell refuses to abandon her research because she thinks that nature, because I guess the stone and the spirit is the embodiment of nature itself. She thinks that it will tell her how nature and humans can coexist without destroying each other. So she won't abandon her research. But one night there's all these mushrooms that we see spewing this mist with fungal spores into the air, and it creates this fog around the camp. Alma says that they should just walk through it and leave. And I guess that is kind of could also be looked at as symbolic of COVID. Symbolically, they're trapped. They're contained within the camp. But she puts on a hazmat suit, tries to walk through it. It gets through her filter. She trips out. And that's when we get a taste of the trippy stuff we're going to see later. They pull her back. Zach shows up. And that's when, they try to... Something about... Zach arrives to speak with others. Oh, he tells Dr. Wendell how else they can communicate. By sitting next to the stone and drinking this special drink with mushrooms. So Martin does. He trips out. Zach shows up. Tries to make the sacrifice of Martin. Alma fights him off. Runs back to the camp. And sees Dr. Wendell with the keyboard making the sound. And there's all these pictures around here of Martin and Alma, but also all their other victims. Well, the ones that they've actually killed. And you find out they've been working together the whole time. And it was probably them that assaulted them and kind of laid all the breadcrumbs for them to go through this whole thing. And even when they first escape Zach's, Martin finds like a couple other dead bodies. So again, it just made me think of 28 Days Later. Like, they get there, he's hospitable, find out he wants something from them, so then they have to escape, and there's just a pile of bodies outside. So Alma kills Zach, and then makes it back to Martin, who is with, Dr. Wendell's with Martin, is able to fight her off. Then we get, like, everything trippy, which, lights, the music, the DMT kind of designs, the kaleidoscope stuff, and up-close bits of nature, and blooming and dying. And then it ends with, and also the mist has encircled or consumed the entire camp, and we kind of just see Dr. Wendell walking through it, sort of breathing it in, absorbing it. Then the next day, after all the trippiness, she seems to just like let go and fall down. She says thank you. I thought she died, but I guess she didn't. And then Martin comes to, and Alma, we see her blurry vision kind of lean into Martin. And with a different voice, she says, "Let me guide you out of the woods." I thought maybe it was the voice of nature. Maybe because they weren't trying to mess with nature. The other two were. But also killing each other, killing humans to communicate with nature. However it worked, I'm not sure. That's just kind of what I took away from it, was that either through her or now she is sort of the voice of the forest, or the entity of the forest. Or maybe it's left open to interpretation. I'm not sure. But, so, even if I don't fully understand the film, and I know the comments are going to be like, well, actually, if you watch it as many times as I did, and what like they did on my Midsummer review, and even ones that aren't left open to an interpretation, or even ones that I do explain properly and are correct. Actually, what that means is what I say, because I know more than you do. I thought this was a well-made film. The performances, the cinematography, excellent. The score, excellent. Cinematography and the score are the two best things of this film. Then the performances. It did have a good atmosphere. I mean, with each person they meet, it creates this anxiety, this dread. Because you already kind of have the dread of the woods and sort of the threat of the elements. You know, there's this pandemic, they're going out in the woods. But then everything that happens with Zach creates any kind of anxiety or dread for other people they meet. Like, even though Dr. Wendell helps them out at first, there's always just this off feeling about everybody, which could also be something about COVID. You know, you got to be on your guard with everyone. But yeah, Alma picks up on all the red flags. I get Zach kind of wants to give benefit of the doubt because they were exes, him and Dr. Wendell. But very well made movie. I did enjoy it. I actually watched this before I moved, and I just did get a chance to review it. So it's what I've been wanting to do since I moved, and then since I got Wi-Fi back. So I'm glad I finally got to see it. I did enjoy it quite a bit. Not my favorite horror film of 2021, but still pretty good. So yeah, that's Ben Wheatley's, I guess you could say this is part of the elevated horror. It's definitely artsy. There's definitely some symbolism and metaphors in there. Not as strong as some other ones. Again, even from 2021, I would say I liked The Feast more. It is slow-paced, but again, the slow pace, the lack of music, and everything in the first act when they're out in the woods almost creates this real-time feel, this very natural kind of feel, which really helped it. Not too many negatives that I can say, really. You know, if there was any confusion between me and the film, I guess it's either on me or it was open to interpretation. But yeah, I enjoyed it. But anyway, thank you for watching.